Hey guys, welcome back to the Base Brief. This week we're talking affirmative action's last days, the UN's climate summit, and Greta Thunberg's anti-capitalist remarks, and everything but the midterms. Let's jump in. All right, Brad, it's election day. Are you so excited? Everybody thinks it's like our big Christmas as people in politics.
No, it is not. I am excited for one thing, and that is for the endless election ad spam to be over. I'm telling you, on my Hulu, on my YouTube, whatever, I'm constantly spammed with these targeted ads for my state, but they don't care if they show you the same ad 100 times. So they get so annoying. So I'm really excited for that to be over. In terms of the actual election itself, both because we're at Based a 501c3 and can't weigh in directly on elections, and because we care about the issues more than the politics and parties, election days really aren't that interesting for me. I'm kind of excited for it to be over so we can go back to talking about the issues and the policies rather than the polls or who's going to win this race here or whatever. That said, I will be watching tonight, and I will be enjoying some tears from certain crowds. I will just say that.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting to observe, like you said, we don't weigh in on elections. And you and I both are not people who really believe in politics. We're much more policy people, so I don't really care either. I'm in Georgia, so I hope that this means the end of all these ads. I've been getting so many annoying text messages and everything, but there's a pretty good chance we'll have runoffs here because of how it's structured, so I might still be in for another month. But either way, I think we have a lot more interesting things to talk about. But by the way, Brad, I have to tell you a funny experience. I like to discuss these things because you and I talk about being on camera and what goes on behind the scenes, and Logan and other people around me find it so fascinating, and I realize it's because a lot of people don't know how it goes. So last night I did Kennedy. I'll have clips up in a few minutes after the show. But anyways, I was not feeling good. I've been pretty under the weather. I'm actually having to cancel a trip to Nashville this week because I have some kind of infection. I don't feel very good at all. But I thought I could plow through, and that's my nature. I'm a worker. I hardly ever cancel. I hardly ever back down. I just keep going. So I got to the studio, and I was talking to my sister in the green room, getting ready to get mic'd up, and I was starting to notice my voice was just feeling really weak. And I was like, uh-oh, I need to conserve this. So they get me mic'd up. I'm in my chair. I'm chugging tea, eating peppermints, and it's really short bursts that we're on for, right? Most of the time behind the scenes, guys, we're just sitting there in our chairs, kind of chilling, and then they call you up. So I get through the first segment, my voice is a little weak, but I do fine. Then comes the fourth segment, and that feeling when you're trying so hard not to cough, and it makes it even more irritated, it's just revving up. That was happening to me during the fourth panel, and I was going third because it always goes the Republican chair, Democrat chair, and then the Libertarian chair. And I was like, please hurry up and get to me because I felt like I was about to have a coughing fit on air. And then, of course, in my mind, I'm like, what happens? Do they just cut away from me? Do I just slide out of my chair? What am I going to do? And I had to finally kind of do a little cough to the side, and I had to take a sip of water on air, which I thought was really embarrassing. I wasn't sure if I was allowed to do that or not, but I had to. And yeah, I barely made it through. So if my voice sounds bad in those clips, that's what was going on. But just so y'all know, last night was a very stressful Kennedy appearance for me.
Sounds like it. I'm not going to lie. Have you ever had to fart really bad while you're on air? Because that's happened to me. Then I wait for the commercial break and I just unload.
Well, after my segment, I got into a coughing fit. My poor driver the whole way home probably thought I had COVID. I was hacking up my lungs. I was like, I'm so sorry, sir.
I've also been sick. Not as bad as you, it sounds, but I've had a cold. My boyfriend's had a cold. We tested for COVID because of his work. He needs to know if he has it or not. It's not COVID, but we've been sick. So I'm also trying something new since I got back from my trip to Costa Rica, which was lovely. Thanks for holding it down without me last week, guys. And Jack, but yeah, I've been trying something new the last few days that I think I'm going to stick with for a while. Intermittent fasting. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a form of dieting, sort of. Because I think I want to lose 5 to 10 pounds, but I lift a lot and I work out a lot, so I'm trying to do it without losing a lot of muscle. And the idea is essentially that you only eat. Rather than starving yourself, you consign your eating to an 8-hour window, and then you have 16 hours of fasting. And during those 16 hours, your body's consuming energy from your fat stores rather than from the food you've eaten. So I'm going to see if it works. It's kind of interesting, but I'm coming up. I haven't eaten in about 16 hours. So about 11:30, we're recording this at 11:07. So if I am a little hangry or lightheaded at all, that's probably why. I'm still adjusting But so far I like it. It's a pretty interesting idea to me, and I've never tried it before. So
Yeah, I used to do it actually back when I was like really on my keto kick. When I was living in South Carolina, I was doing intermittent fasting in conjunction with that, and I loved it. You feel really good. You actually like after the first week or two, you'll get to where you don't want food in the mornings. Like it'll sound disgusting to you. You're like, how are people eating breakfast? But it's that first like week or two just mentally training yourself that you don't get to eat when you first wake up. I'm back on my bullshit and eating breakfast all the time now, so I need to like get back in that. I love breakfast, but it's
well, I
actually
have
very,
a bad
very good for
habit
you.
of eating snacks at night, which is the worst time because your body's about to go to sleep. Your metabolism's going to go low, and it's just going to get added as fat. It won't get burned. And so that's the biggest thing for me is stopping eating after dinner. Eat at 6:30 and then don't eat the rest of the night. But anyway, we're going to talk about affirmative action because it might finally, at long last, decades later, be on the chopping block as the Supreme Court's currently just heard oral arguments in 2 cases about affirmative action, and it looks like it may finally be coming to an end. The system of race-based or race-influenced admissions process. Hannah, what's going on with all this?
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and assume that a lot of people in our audience don't know what affirmative action is. I think it's one of those buzzwords in politics that we assume people outside of our inner circle know, and probably most people are not aware of, or if they are aware of the practice, they don't know the word for it. So I actually want to roll, this is surprising to you, I know, I want to play this Tucker Carlson clip about it, and then I want your reaction to it. So let's roll this.
The promise of a meritocratic society is that the most capable people will rise to the positions of the greatest authority. In a meritocracy, for example, you would hire heart surgeons because they're good at heart surgery, not because of how they look or who their parents are. A meritocracy is the only fair way to run a society, and fairness matters to people, always, everywhere. Plus, it works well. Fewer people die on the operating table when you do it that way. For generations, this is how American society ran. If you were smart and you worked hard, you could compete on pretty much equal footing against anyone else in America. They tell you that was never true, but it was true. It was called the American Dream. People moved here from all over the world to partake in that system. But there was a political problem with it. If you've got a meritocratic society, it's pretty hard to play race politics because race plays no role in advancement. Individual initiative is what matters. Group interests are irrelevant in a meritocracy. Now, that may sound idyllic to you. It may sound like the kind of country you'd want to live in. But for the Democratic Party, it was a disaster. How do you get your voters to the polls if they're not racially aggrieved? It's hard. So at the tail end of the civil rights movement, after all the legislation guaranteeing equality under the law had already been passed, Democrats introduced a new concept. They called it affirmative action. The idea was to punish or reward Americans based on the color of their skin. Ironically, this was precisely the evil practice that the civil rights movement was designed to abolish. Racial discrimination was unequivocally wrong. That was the whole point of the skirmish on the Edmund Pettus Bridge and the March on Washington. Oh, but no, said Democrats, slyly repainting the slogans on the barn. Actually, racial discrimination can be good. It all depends on who's being discriminated against. That was their argument. That is still their argument more than 50 years later. But even now, after all of this time, most people, if you explain it clearly, don't really buy it. Wait, I can't have a job or get into college or get a federal contract because I was born with the wrong skin color? That sounds wrong.
So, Brad, I very strongly agree with Tucker on a few things. First and foremost is that Americans want to live in a meritocracy, me included, right? Like, I was told that growing up, that in America, you work really hard, you have opportunity to get ahead, and if you are smart and you do the right things, then you can, have anything you want in the world. And that is what I want in life, right? I don't want to be handed anything. I don't need a participation trophy. I just want the right to succeed on my own merits. And I think that I would say that's where most other Americans are. What do you think?
I agree completely in terms of that being the aspiration and the goal and the American values that have strived for. I think Tucker, the part of this I don't fully agree with is when he says that's what we used to have. I'm not sure that is what we used to have. There were barriers for lots of people. I agree that maybe we all agreed on that as a goal more in the past, but I'm not sure we ever lived in a perfect meritocracy like he says. But I do think that's the goal, and it should be the goal, and is for most Americans, because affirmative action is really unpopular in the polls, even among Democrats and even among racial minorities. And that's because Americans are meritocratic. But I was poking around a little bit on this, and Harvard is at the core of one of the cases that's going before the Supreme Court. Because even though they're a private college, they take tons of federal subsidies, which means they're basically legally required to have an equal protection and non-discrimination like a public school would. Let me read you this, Hannah. This is something I discovered from Kenny Zhu in City Journal, which he is a Asian American conservative writer. He's a really prominent activist against affirmative action, and he's compiled lots of good data on this. Here's what he writes. Duke University economist Peter Asuriacano estimates that an Asian American with a 25% chance of admission to Harvard would have a 33% chance if he or she were white, a 75% chance if Hispanic, and a 95% chance if black. So you go from 25% chance of admission to Harvard if you're Asian to 95% if you're black with all the same scores and everything else. That is not meritocracy. That is some perverse system where we're uplifting some people and downlifting others on the basis of immutable characteristics. And so if that gets a big blow struck against it by the Supreme Court, which I think it most likely will, I'll be celebrating that decision because I think there's value in diversity, but I don't think forced diversity at the cost of discrimination is something we should pursue.
So I agree with you, and I want to go back and give a little bit of just historical settings. But after the Civil War, we passed the 14th Amendment, and this basically says that all Americans should be treated equally under the law, right? It's a great law, it's a great premise, and I 100% back it. And then what happened is you had a lot of people not obey that and have Jim Crow, for decades and decades. And ultimately you get to the 1960s with the Civil Rights Movement, and that accumulates in the Civil Rights Act. And then affirmative action comes through an executive order passed by LBJ, right? And the whole idea was initially that if you were getting federal funds as a business, you couldn't have these intelligence tests basically that they were trying to use to block black people, right? They would do these kinds of things where they're like, we're not treating you differently under the law. You just don't score as well on these tests. You're just not as smart as other people. And it led to a lot of really racist beliefs. The premise of affirmative action was not, and I agree with this, that black people are not less intelligent. They've had less access to education. When they have been given an education, they've had worse schools. There's been many policies that have been put in place to hold them back in these kinds of academic achievements. And so using those kinds of tests should not be valid to block them from employment, should not be this loophole to get you out of equal application of the law. And this is, again, talking about businesses that have federal funds, right? As this goes on and progresses, it starts going through the courts. It eventually gets extended to where it applies to many people of color. It starts to apply to women as well. And then it really starts to extend into higher education, which is mostly where we see this battle being fought today. And that is because, one, a vast majority of colleges and universities are public. And even those that are private, like you mentioned, like Harvard, often get vast sums of money, taxpayer dollars behind the scenes for a multitude of reasons. And so as a whole, we now have a system of higher education in this country where white people and Asian people are basically discriminated against under affirmative action, because they say, because there are so many more white people and Asian Americans that are scoring highly, and because we want to have a more diverse pool of people coming into our colleges, we're going to basically downrank you because of your skin and uprank these other people who aren't scoring as well because of their skin. And so obviously this leads to what I would say is a continuation of racial division in this country, right? Because you are continuing to treat people differently on the basis of their skin color. You're also saying to people that there's reason to have animosity between the races, right? Because now you're competing on these grounds. And so I think, and I say this as a woman too, we see women graduating college at higher rates than men, and I think that's fantastic these days. But the number one thing I hear from men is well, you got affirmative action then. And it's well, it's hard to combat that, right? And so I think it actually can hold you back as a woman trying to, progress in society, as a person of color trying to progress in society, when people see your achievements as something you just got because you got this special handout, special favor. So as a whole, I think affirmative action is very racist. It's very unfair. It's very unconstitutional. But where I will push back on Tucker, and I think this is what you said, is that we never had a straight meritocracy. We always had in this country serious things on the books that held some people back, that prioritized some people over over others. And there is still real underlying systemic racism that has to be grappled with. And I think I want to go back to that in a little bit. But as you said too, when we're talking about diversity, I think diversity is a wonderful thing, right? When you don't have a group of diverse people in a room, you miss things. You don't see perspectives. You aren't aware of everything that you're talking about. Like, having diversity always leads to more information, more wisdom. It's a desirable thing to have. But notably under affirmative action, they actually aren't even prioritizing true diversity. And this came up during oral arguments where they were questioning Harvard's attorney who's having to defend this law. And he basically said two things. I want to roll this clip. He said, one, that they rely on self-reporting to even determine who falls into the racial categories they're prioritizing. And then secondarily, he admitted that they don't prioritize diversity in things like ideology, religion, nationality, socioeconomic status. Let's roll this clip really briefly.
How are applicants from Middle Eastern countries classified, from Jordan, Iraq, Iran, Egypt, and the like?
My understanding is that just like other situations where they might not fit within the particular boxes on the common application, that we rely on self-reporting, and we would ask, they can volunteer their particular country of origin.
But if they honestly check one of the boxes, which one are they supposed to check?
I do not know the answer to that question.
So, Brad, when I heard that, the first thing I thought of was Elizabeth Warren, who famously, as a white woman, said she was Native American to get into school and then used that to teach at school and has used that to propel her career all the way up to the Senate when she finally got called on it. And turns out she's less than 1% Native American. How common do you think that is?
Yeah, well, that's the problem is self-identification, and also the way they treat these racial groups as monolithic. Has never made any sense. A good example is, absolutely, was there past horrible discrimination against African Americans and descendants of slaves? Yes. But the affirmative action system treats somebody who is an immigrant from Nigeria, from one of the elite rich, top 0.001%, who's been privileged like a prince their whole life and comes to the States for college. They have not faced racial discrimination, but they get affirmative action the same as an African American who is a descendant of slavery, whose family faced systemic racism, who there's been a wealth gap. Like, it has never made sense because it treats people as if they've had a uniform experience because they share an identity box in the census, but that's simply not how reality works. And then, like you said, colleges don't care about diversity in any real sense. This came out during the oral arguments about this affirmative action case. They care about visual diversity. They care about the kind of diversity that shows up on your brochure. So you can have one of every person of every color, and you can check all your boxes and say, look how diverse we are. They don't care about diversity of religion. They don't care about diversity of ideology and political views. They don't even really care about diversity of experiences or diversity of personalities or just plain old meritocracy like the rest of us care about. They increasingly just care about the identity politics, visual diversity, and they're reverse engineering their systems to get that at the expense of real, true, meaningful diversity and meritocracy. And I think everyone loses from that. Not just the people who are discriminated against, but also the people who are uplifted to positions where maybe they shouldn't be based on the merits, or they should be, but now people are going to cast an eye at them and view them as an affirmative action pick when actually they really do deserve to be there, all because of this broken system that values the wrong things.
Well, I love that you brought that up because that very issue actually came up with one of the justices on the Supreme Court. Justice Sotomayor actually admitted during oral arguments that she was an affirmative action graduate, that she would not have gotten into her Ivy League college had it not been for affirmative action. She didn't have the scores. She couldn't have been able to compete. And I thought that was really interesting on a couple of premises. So one, I would think that if that were the case, she should recuse herself. Like, that seems like a very glaring conflict of interest to me. I'm not sure if that struck you that way.
I don't agree, only because the standard for recusing yourself from a case for Supreme Court judges is very, very high. Like, this came up when people wanted Justice Thomas to recuse himself from January 6th case because his wife was texting or involved somehow, I don't know. And he didn't. And I remember listening to some lawyers at the time saying that, like, the bar for recusal is really high. In fact, like, a bunch of these justices went to Harvard, right? Who is a party in this. Like, if you were to start recusing people with any connection to cases, you would run out of judges pretty quickly. I think, because you could also say that someone like Brett Kavanaugh, as a white man, was a victim of affirmative action potentially. Like, as much as Sonia Sotomayor may have been a beneficiary, according to herself. So I'm fine with her not recusing herself. But I thought that was a glaring thing to just say, yeah, I benefited. Clearly this is good.
Well,
Because she's also like the least, just to be honest with you, the least impressive of the liberal justices. Like, Elena Kagan eats her lunch and is much more respected than Sonia Sotomayor. So it doesn't super help her case.
Well, and that brings me to my next clip I want to roll. Tucker Carlson actually went after her pretty hard for not really deserving her seat on the bench. So let's roll this clip.
Affirmative action is not only the very definition of racism, it's also highly embarrassing in its particulars. The closer you get to it, the more embarrassing it is. When you elevate people on the basis of their appearance, you tend not to get very impressive people. Why would you? Unless you're buying sunscreen, skin tone is a totally irrelevant criterion. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor unwittingly made that point today. Sotomayor openly concedes that she got her job because of affirmative action. She was completely and demonstrably unqualified for the position.
So I think what you said earlier is absolutely correct. This leads to people saying, you don't really deserve this. You don't deserve to be here. You didn't earn this. You're just getting this handout. And I think that that's, to me, that's not how I as a woman would ever want to succeed, right? Like, I don't want the first female president to be there just because she's a woman. Like, I remember so many people saying they were so sad when Hillary Clinton didn't become president. I was like, I'm not. I want the first female president to be somebody who's earned it, who's achieved it on their own, who's like actually a person of merit and character, and I want to be proud of the first.
You're telling
female.
me Hillary Clinton isn't a person of merit and character?
Not really. But okay, so I want to move on from this though, because Justice Sotomayor also made another, that I thought, bombshell comment during oral arguments, where she basically said the quiet part out loud in arguing for the continued need to have affirmative action. So she said, if you're Black, you're more likely to be in an under-resourced school. You are more likely to be taught by teachers who are not as qualified as others. You're more likely to be viewed as having less academic potential. I thought this was significant because I 100% agree with her. And I've been making this argument for at least 2-3 years now that government public schools are one of the most systemically racist institutions in this country. And we know that. We know that kids who are Black are trapped into failing school districts. They are there largely due to old practices like redlining that made sure Black people could only live in certain parts of the city. We then dictate where kids go to school based off of their zip codes. And we then fund public schools largely based off of property taxes. And so if you live in a poor area that collects less in property taxes, that school has less funding. You're also more likely to be in a high crime area. You attract less qualified teachers to go to these schools. And of course, you have worse and worse academic results coming out. To me, that is one of the strongest arguments, and always has been, for school choice. Right? It doesn't matter how much money you throw at this program at these problems. We've seen that we're spending on average $15,000 per year per kid in public schools. It's not working to fix this disproportionality that we continue to see, because it is systemic. And the only way to fix that is to break the system and let kids escape these failing schools through school choice. So I thought she actually made an excellent argument, not for affirmative action, which is treating a symptom of the larger problem, but for actually restructuring public schools.
Yeah. Sonia Sotomayor, the least likely school choice advocate of all time, coming out of the woodwork here. But I found that interesting too, because I don't necessarily disagree with her either, but you can't back end try to fix it. Like, after they're all educated through their K through 12, say, well, we need to correct here at the end and send more African Americans to college because they didn't have opportunities early on. That's actually setting them up to fail in college by putting them in places where they couldn't get on their grades and SAT scores, which predict their academic ability to keep up in college. That's part of why we have a big gap in college academic outcomes between African Americans and white Americans at the college level. And so you have to go back to the source and fix the source, not try to just jerry-rig a more equal outcome at the end. It's kind of like when they do this with, we're going to mandate that 1 in 5 women, 1 in 5 board members of a company has to be a woman. Well, it's like, you're not really fixing the problem, which is that there are so few women in the C-suite to begin with to pick from. at the highest levels of business. Like, how do we fix that? You can't just jerry rig a better outcome at the end. That's not going to work. And I think that's essentially what affirmative action tries to do.
Yeah, and as a result, it does end up being very racist. I want to roll this last clip by Tucker.
So just to remind you, something you already know but probably never think about, the U.S. government collects data on people's races. Now, in a society where we're all equal as citizens under the law, why would they do that? That's what the Nazis did. So we're against keeping track of people on the basis of race, aren't we? And with so much at stake, how do we determine someone's race? How long before we're taking blood tests or measuring the shape of people's heads? It's been done before. It happens in other countries to this day. It's really dark and disgusting. So the question in that exchange was, what box do the Middle Easterners check? Oh, no idea. But of course, everyone knows the answer. If you want to get into a competitive school, the best bet for those Middle Easterners would be to identify as black. And studies prove it.
So I agree with Tucker here. I think it is a racist system on its face. I think it's wrong. What does irk me, as somebody who's spent a lot of time working on criminal justice reform and other areas where there is overt systemic racism, is that people like Tucker and conservatives will shout you down and say, how dare you suggest government's racist? How dare you say this? And then turn around and admit that it's systemically racist when it's a policy they don't like, right? And it's like, if you can admit it in these areas, why can you not see it across the board? And I just think this is why tribalism makes you stupid and blind and unable to ever actually really come together against the larger issues we face, which are things like systemic racism, which is corruption and injustice that government has codified into place. So I just wish he could be a little bit more self-aware around that. All right, well, we will be awaiting the Supreme Court decision. It should be coming down any day now on affirmative action, so we're on court watch for now, but that's the lowdown that you need for when it does break. In other big news, there is a big fancy event going on right now, and we're betting that you, like us, did not quite get a ticket. Brad, talk to us about COP27.
Yeah, so elites, politicians, and activists are flocking to Egypt this week for COP27, which is a big United Nations annual climate change conference. That's meant to, quote unquote, deliver action on an array of issues critical to tackling the climate emergency, such as urgently reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So you can expect the U.S. is sending a delegation that will include tons of Biden cabinet officials, and actually the president himself will be there, and all these world leaders and the activists concerned about this issue will get up and they'll make these big speeches, they'll have these panels, and then they'll leave and nothing will change. But in the process, and this is why I find this story so interesting and kind of maddening actually, they're going to emit an insane amount of carbon to have their little conference, because while Zoom was apparently good enough for your kid's school for a year, they can't be bothered to meet remotely. They all need to get together and hobnob in person. So we don't know exactly how much, Hannah, for this year it will entail, but we can look at last year's COP26, and they emitted, all things considered, more than 102,000 tons of carbon dioxide being emitted. And just to put that in context, the typical American emits about 15 tons of CO2 in an entire year. So it pisses me off, frankly, to see these people gather for this conference to tell us about how we need to sacrifice to stop climate change, which I think is a real issue, and I know you do too, but yet they can't even give up the private jet and use Zoom. Like, seriously, guys?
Oh my gosh, it's so gross. And it's interesting to me because we are already seeing the fallout of what their ideas look like in Europe's energy crisis right now, because Europe got cut off from Russia's energy sector and their bills are skyrocketing. I heard one person on podcast saying they were paying $700-800 a month for their energy bill. That is a crisis for somebody who lives making an average income, right? Like, that's a mortgage payment for some people. That is not sustainable. And yet their ideas are, they're fine with doing these kinds of things, and they say it'll have to temporarily hurt, to get to the other side. They're fine pushing that on working class people, on middle income earners, on totally bankrupting the middle class to get where they want to go. And yet they are behaving like this. So it has always been, I just think, so hypocritical. And this is just yet another example of how I think Democrats and especially progressives have these policies that hurt the very people they claim to stand for the very most.
So Biden himself is going to go, and it's going to contribute enormously to the carbon emissions involved with this conference. But let me, we don't know the future exactly how it will work, but let's talk about what he did last year when he went to Glasgow, Scotland, which is actually even closer than Egypt. So it'll be even worse this year. But President Biden generated an estimated 2.2 million pounds of carbon during his trip to Europe to speak on the perils of climate change, the Daily Mail reported of last year's conference. The gigantic carbon footprint is comprised of 2.16 million pounds of carbon dioxide generated by the 4 large planes that comprise his airborne entourage on the trip, where the president will speak at the COP26 summit on climate change in Glasgow. And then he's also got the fleet of cars that he got. An average American would generate just 0.365 pounds of carbon if they flew a similar distance on a regular flight. But with all the crazy flights and multiple cars he brings with him in an airplane, the cars go on the airplane and they fly over to Europe. He emitted all that carbon when he could have literally just spoke to them via Zoom. But I guess that's not, the elites just cannot be bothered, right? Like of course they have to go to their work in person. I mean, to me, it's maddening. It makes it just really hard to take anything they say seriously because they do not practice what they preach.
No, they absolutely don't practice what they preach. And what they preach is also utter hogwash. As I covered earlier this week, Greta Thunberg, who's one of their top puppets for climate change activism, they had her trotting around in London. And she was making what has become the typical sort of argument from this camp, which is that capitalism is to blame for climate change. And she was really going after the West. I want to play a couple of her clips really, really briefly. Let's roll this one.
It is a system defined by colonialism, imperialism, oppression, and genocide by the so-called global north.
So she starts off saying that it is a system of colonialism, imperialism, oppression, genocide, and racist, oppressive extractionism. Do you ever feel like they're just playing like woke word scramble, just trying to see how many like of these words they can fit into a sentence? I'm like, oh my gosh.
I do. I at least appreciate the openness. We've been saying for a long time that the far left green movement is really like a red movement. It's like a watermelon, green on the outside, red for communists on the inside. But at least they're finally like opening up about it. Now, as you explained in a great YouTube video this week, people check out Hannah's channel if you haven't yet. This is really ironic for a couple reasons, but one of which is that capitalism creates enormous wealth, and as countries get richer, they care a lot more about their environment and they take a lot better care of their environment. So it's just not the case that capitalism and environmental protection are at odds. Poverty and environmental protection are at odds, and nothing has done more to reduce global poverty than the spread of capitalism. So I already don't understand why people listen to Greta for a lot of reasons. I don't want to pick on her or be mean, but like, she doesn't have any idea what she's talking about. She's basically just a mouthpiece, and she's very unhinged in her rhetoric at time. But she clearly, for all her talk about science, doesn't care about social science like economics because she has no understanding of it whatsoever.
Like, I'm sorry, Greta, if you are just trying to stay alive, you're not going to care about what your coal-fueled fire is emitting into the air, right? You don't have time to care about these things until you have your basic needs met. Capitalism has done more to address that than any other system times 10. I also think it's funny that they do this because I'm like, capitalism was only invented 200 years ago, and according to you guys, climate change has been gearing up for a long, long time, right? But all of a sudden capitalism came along, and that's what really is the scapegoat here. It's ridiculous, and I think it just shows how flawed their agenda is, and also just how intentional they are, right? Like, I really don't believe that these people care about the climate, both in how they act with these private jets and these large summits, but also in the policies they put forth, because there are things that we could be doing that you and I would agree with that would start to address some of these issues in a meaningful way. That's not what they're pushing. Instead, it's usually just wealth redistribution. And so I'm not here for it at all. But I will give Greta a little credit because she does seem to be, at the very least, like a true believer in the crap she's preaching. Let's roll this clip where she went off on the COP summit.
This COP26 is so far just like the previous COPs, and that has led us nowhere. They have led us nowhere. Inside COP, they're just politicians and people in power pretending to take our future seriously, pretending to take the present seriously of the people who are being affected already today by the climate crisis. Change is not going to come from inside there. That is not leadership. This is leadership. Yeah! This is what leadership looks like. We we say no more blah blah blah, no more exploitation of people and nature and the planet, no more exploitation, no more blah blah blah, no more whatever the they're doing inside there. We're sick and tired of it, and we're gonna make the change, whether they like it or not.
So that was from Greta speaking at last year's conference, and she was calling them out for all it just being virtue signaling. And then this year she's not going, which credit to her, she's not going. She's not doing the whole fly your private jet around the world thing. So I give her, I'm a huge critic of her, but I give her some credit for that. She's not like the rest of them, not as hypocritical.
That's right. So she gets 1 point from me. That's it.
Yeah.
Still 1 star. All right. We are going to move on to our very online segment this week. We know you need a breath of fresh air and something different in the news, and gosh, we do too. So we have compiled some of our favorite things we've seen online. Brad, I'll let you kick it off.
So this is the worst thing I've seen on Twitter in a long time, and that's saying something because Twitter is a dark, deep pit of absolute depravity and idiocy. But this is a tweet from a self-described epidemiologist and federal disaster medicine team member who promotes COVID data as an expert. Here's what he tweeted. Some perspective for those who still don't get it. If I were forced to be infected by either HIV or COVID, I would choose HIV without hesitation. Hannah, what the actual crap is this?
When people say that progressivism is a mental illness, these kinds of statements make me start to think they're right. I honestly, that makes no sense whatsoever. This is utterly unhinged. They're not even comparable whatsoever.
COVID is pretty mild for the vast majority of people who get it. Whereas HIV, thankfully, thank God, is no longer a death sentence the way it once was. You can live for decades with it with extensive treatment, but it's like a profound illness that's still life-threatening and still requires all this stuff for a lot of people, especially if you take the vaccine. COVID is like a bad cold. There's no vaccine for AIDS. I think this is offensive to the gay community and and even the black community and anyone who's had a loved one who died in the AIDS crisis to have experts, quote unquote, and of course he's got the Ukraine flag in his bio. It's and a mask symbol in his bio. These people, I don't know, at some point the COVID, Karen, hysteria, alarmism, it becomes a cult where they have their own religious dogma, and instead of following science, they're following some weird sort of cult mentality and he only doubles down on it in a thread to continue, even though he's being roasted for this. I also want to know, what federal team is he on? Is the government listening to this guy as some sort of expert? Because if so, that's a huge red flag.
Yeah, that's very concerning, and I'm very tired of these people pretending that they're following the science and they just know so much more about science than you. It's no, you are in deep groupthink, you are in a very dense bubble, and you should have no access to any levers of power. Also, I just have to side note say, Ukraine flag in the bio is my new red flag.
I support Ukraine, but it's just the same cringe people that are masks, Ukraine, BLM. It's becoming one of the slogans for the NPCs.
Yes, exactly. I'm explain to me in depth the geopolitical conflict occurring in Ukraine and Russia. And you have 10 seconds if you have this flag in your bio, and I bet you can't. Guarantee you know nothing about what's happening.
Ask them to name 3 cities in Ukraine.
Seriously. Okay, well, that wasn't the only high-key crazy thing Brad and I saw online this week. There was also this clip from MSNBC host Joy Reid. Let's roll it.
The only people I ever hear use the word inflation are journalists and economists, right? So that is not part of the normal lexicon of the way people talk. So it's interesting that Republicans are doing something they don't normally do, right? Which is not use the common tongue, right? Not use just common English to sort of do on their campaigns like they're doing with crime. But what they've done is they've taught people the word inflation, right? Yeah. Most people who would have never used that word ever in their lives are using it now because they've been taught it, including on TV, including in newspapers. They've been taught this word, and they sort of wrap this word around whatever it is that they really want to vote, the reasons they really want to vote.
So, talk about telling on yourself for being uneducated. I don't know about you, but like I'd heard the word inflation before it started right now. I do have a degree in economics, but I also like am familiar with basic 20th century American history, and it's like I don't know, maybe she's telling on herself that she's not very educated about the economy if she's never heard the word inflation before, but I think most Americans had.
Like, sweetie, we've been asking you to go to Econ 101 for a minute now, and I'll say it again. Please go to Econ 101. This is not hard. This is literally high school level econ. Like, you should know what inflation is. And if anybody didn't know what it was, they had to be taught about it because your policies created it, and they needed to be explained what was happening to them. So either way, I don't really think you have a leg to stand on. It's not like we made up inflation, that it's like this, term that we created, and all of a sudden people are like it's like she's saying it's fake news or something. Like,
yeah, it's like Republicans didn't teach Americans inflation. The freaking prices at the gas pump did. Yeah. The prices at the grocery store did, because they surged, because you idiots decided to spend trillions of dollars we didn't have and print them out of thin air to make up the difference. And then guess what? Prices went up, and Americans are like, wow, everything's so expensive. I'm getting poorer all around me. What is this? Oh, this is called inflation. That doesn't, even if they weren't familiar with the word before, it's not that Republicans taught them this, it's that they observed it and then found out what the word was to describe the phenomenon that's happening in their everyday lives. When people say they don't trust the mainstream media anymore, they don't trust the elites anymore, just clips like this really put into picture why that is, and their loss of trust and their loss of credibility is their own fault.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, if you don't know what inflation is, you're certainly not an expert. You need to get off my TV, because why am I listening to you? Like, what do you have to contribute and offer? It seems like you need to go back to school. All right. Well, speaking of getting schooled, SNL had a really funny skit this weekend. Was it this weekend?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't actually watch SNL. I just see it online. So SNL had a very funny skit this past weekend that went pretty hard after COVID, and a lot of the Karens were high-key upset about it. Let's roll this.
Are you feeling tired and worn down? Sick of the endless grind at work? Exhausted by your family, desperate for some peace and quiet?
Daniel! Your kids want you!
Then ask your doctor about COVID. By simply getting COVID, you're guaranteed a 5 and sometimes even 10-day vacation from all of life's problems.
I needed a break. Just some time away from everyone. So my doctor suggested I get COVID, and it was the greatest week of my life.
All I wanted was to sit on the good part of the couch and watch the Netflix I want to watch. And I was finally able to, thanks to COVID.
At first, I was worried about getting COVID, but my doctor assured me it's fine now. I'm triple vaxxed, quadruple if you count HPV. So it's my time to shine.
Side effects of COVID include having COVID, which is still kind of bad, but doesn't it seem different now?
I definitely got sick. But I also got paid for 10 days to never leave a blanket. Plus, I got a great story I could tell people at work. It was like I had a bad cold for 3 days.
And of course I had to isolate from my 3 kids because I didn't want to get them sick.
But what do they eat?
I gave it 14 days to be extra safe.
And for an extra fee, we'll knock out the Wi-Fi near your house so you can't do any Zooms.
Oh, well, too bad.
COVID is the perfect way to get out of jury duty, cousin's wedding, friend's improv show, neighbor's adult baptism, and husband's murder trial. At this point, COVID is basically a 10-day cruise, which is also a great way to get COVID.
So, Hannah, I thought this was really funny. It also told us how much the narrative has shifted among the mainstream, that like SNL can now joke like this. What was your initial reaction?
Oh, I thought it was hilarious, and I hardly ever think SNL is hilarious. So it was a nice skit. I thought it was funny. I think this actually is how a lot of people see COVID. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I had it earlier this year, and I actually had a pretty bad bout with it, even though I did have the vaccine. So I'm still not trying to get it, but I can laugh at it, and I thought it was pretty true. I mean, honestly, look, COVID was tough on parents. I think a lot of parents would like a break from their kids, want to break from the education thing, want to break from like 24/7 Zooms. Like, it has been a lot mentally. And I think for me and you, I'll speak for myself, it's not been as much for me, right? Because I don't have kids. I've had family nearby. Like, my life has kind of been great during COVID, but I can only imagine if I had been locked down with kids this whole time, especially as a woman. We know women still do a lot more of the work in the house. They do a lot more of the work in their personal relationships with their spouses. And I think that this would be, you know, really funny to most people in that demographic of like, yeah, a vacation away from all this sounds great.
Yeah, and if anything, it's a good sign, right? That people have moved on from COVID. There's a vaccine available for anyone who wants it, and that people can joke about it. But the Karens were so angry. How dare you joke about our COVID? So let's go through. The COVID Karen in chief, the OG COVID Karen, Taylor Lorenz, a Washington Post journalist, tweeted, "Thousands are dying a week. Millions disabled, zero protections for the elderly and immunocompromised. Shit like this is evil, to be honest." Another person wrote, "My dad died from COVID, and SNL thinks it's appropriate to joke about the humanitarian crisis / mass disabling event that is this pandemic." Another person wrote, "A million dead, millions affected by long COVID where they can't breathe, walk, hold a job. Thanks, COVID. It must be nice being affluent, wealthy people who can go about their day. Sorry, people with cancer or the immunocompromised who are still living with Nightmareville. When it had killed 100,000 of us, it was tragic," said another person. "Now we're up over 1 million. It's the third leading cause of death in the country. It's still killing 3,000 people a week, and it's a joke." People, get a grip. If anything, things that are serious or that were traumatizing, those are the things we need to joke about the most. Humor is a way of processing. Humor is a way of humanizing and discussing our emotions and putting them out there. And if that's why even the most messed up things can make for good jokes. Like the idea that, oh, you don't care about the people that died if you joke about COVID. Actually, you're just a person who can't take a joke. Like, calm down, people.
I think it's become their new sacred cow, honestly, for a lot of people on the left. Like, their whole regime around COVID, it really did become their religion. It became a cult. And they will never be able to, one, look back and admit errors, significant errors that they made, and two, to be able to joke about it. Or three, to even acknowledge that, like, yes, a lot of people died, but a lot more people died than would have because of disease, because of government policies. Like, that's actually what most people died from, right? Sending old people to nursing homes, having really stupid regulations that prevented people from going to open hospital beds to overflowing ones, continual blockage of testing and things the free market could have done to actually expedite how we were addressing this and handling, giving us fake information like how wearing cloth masks would prevent it, right? All of these things actually are what got that many people killed, not the disease itself. And since the vaccine has come about, the reality is the vast majority of people are fine. And so it is okay to look back and apply some humor. I'm with you. Like, I think sometimes I'm a proponent of dark humor even. I think that's one of the best ways to deal with heavy issues. As somebody who has mental health issues, like, I love dark humor. So I'm just not here for this. I think this is really absurd, and a lot of people just need to go touch grass, honestly.
They're just Karens. They just want to control other people. Like, all of this doesn't make any sense. These people are the most pro-vax people, but they're out here acting like there's no protections for the disabled. Like, I'm sorry, what do you call the vaccine? I thought you said that protects you, and it does, from death or serious illness. But then they're also acting like, oh, but immunocompromised people exist. Okay, they existed before the pandemic. And they had to isolate when there was flu and other things that were a threat to them. Like, they take these rare edge cases and they want to batter us into submission and control our whole lives because I don't know, maybe they're just neurotic. Maybe they got off on the power and the control. But whoever they are, all these people that can't take a joke and still want this to be a forever emergency they can use to control us, as far as I'm concerned, they can shove it, right? Absolutely, I never want to hear from any of them again. They went viral for talking about an article that called for a pandemic amnesty for all the people that were wrong. No amnesty. No. Yep. You people have lost your credibility forever for all the terrible things you advocated for and were wrong about. Sorry, not sorry. Next.
Well, speaking of taking a joke, Brad, you had to kind of take a joke over the past week. You were, I don't even know what you call this. So, you had a parody of you on a sexual cartoon show?
I don't know how to describe it either, but the show Big Mouth, which is apparently a very sexual cartoon show about preteens, which is just creepy, named a sex pillow, which I wasn't aware was a thing, after yours truly. Let's roll this clip.
Matthew, it is my very horny pleasure to introduce you to Brad Polumbo and Suzette St. James.
Hello, folks. Hello, gorgeous.
Ah, Shantae, bro. The three of us have been sensual collaborators for, what, over a year now, guys?
So, someone sent this to me who watches the show and who knows me, and at first I was like, that's a weird coincidence. But then they looked at the subtitles, Hannah, and the name is spelled Polumbo. And Polumbo is a rare last name, but where other people do have it, it's almost always spelled P-A-L. Very rare is the P-O-L spelling. I've never met anybody who has it like that. So Brad Polumbo being included like that seems to me like it can't be a coincidence. So I think it has to be one of two things. And you let me know what you think is more likely. Either one of these writers has seen my tweets or my TikToks or something, and my name got stuck in their subconscious, and they pulled it out, and they didn't realize, they just thought they'd come up with a fake name. Or one of them hates me or is like, has a thing about me and decided to own me by naming a sex pillow in their weird cartoon show about me. I don't know, but it can't be a coincidence.
I agree, because you and I have talked about this. I've always been so jealous that you have a very unique name, because you can always get just your name as your handles, and I always have to get crazy and like add my middle name, a bunch of numbers and all kinds of stuff. So there are no other Brad Polumbos, and it just does not feel coincidental to me. Now, I had never heard of the show. When you posted the clip of this, I was really curious. I went and I watched a little bit of it, and it's a weird show. Like,
I've never seen it.
I don't throw this word around loosely. I've probably never used it before in my life, but it really came across to me as like a groomer show. Like, because it's a cartoon, it's explicitly sexual, it seems to be targeting younger people, and it is way beyond like casual sex jokes. Like, it is a like full on like show about sex. It was bizarre and weird. I also, even after watching, still do not quite understand what a sex pillow was, but I felt violated watching the show. And Logan was watching it with me. We were like, what is this? Like, I felt scandalized. I was like, I feel like I'm watching porn or something. Like, I don't know what this is, but it's on Netflix.
And it's super popular. It's just weird.
I don't know, guys. If you watch the show, like, weigh in and let us know if there's more context to this sex pillow named Brad Polumbo. I don't want to watch the show to find out because it was so weird, but if you watch it, we'd like more information. But Brad, like, I think you've got a fan in the writer's room is all I can say. And maybe by fan a hater, but...
I want my royalties check, baby. I want that Netflix money. Come through. But joking aside, like, stuff is just so weird, man. Like, if you told me that in 2022... I would be on Dr. Phil and somebody would name a sex pillow after me in a popular television show, I would have looked like you were smoking crack. Like, I would have said, get out of here, crackhead.
It's been a big year for you, Brad.
Yeah. These were one of the highlights of my year, being on Big Mouth.
Launched a company, went on Dr. Phil, had a sex pillow named after you. The year of 2022.
Yeah, wow.
All right, well, let's move on to hot takes and wrap up. My hot take this week is that I think online grammar Nazis are the worst. And I don't know if there just happen to be a lot of them in my audience, but there is always somebody there right away. The minute I make a typo, the minute I have one grammatical error, letting me know in detail, DMing me even. And I'm just like, guys, it's a tweet. This is not a research paper. This is not even an article I'm publishing. It's a tweet. It's a Facebook post. It's an Instagram. Like, I promise you, I have good grammar. I know when I make an error. People make mistakes, especially when you post dozens of times a day. There's going to be a typo. There's going to be a word when I'm voice texting that gets misconstrued, etc. Like, give it a rest. I don't understand the need to, like, correct every little detail from other people. It's exhausting to me.
Yeah, well, especially like just in a tweet or something, you're typing from your phone or whatever, and it's like they'll act as if your typo disqualifies your point when it's like totally irrelevant. Yeah, I think that's pretty dumb. Okay, so my hot take is that there are very few foods that cannot be made better with some buffalo sauce. And I'm going to try to think of what the weirdest things that I put buffalo sauce on. I'll put it on like raw broccoli. Like I have a buffalo wings thing. And the best buffalo wings you can get anywhere, and I'm calling it right now, are from TGI Fridays. You get the boneless buffalo wings. They're drenched in sauce. Oh, I'm hungry just thinking about it. It was when I got back from Costa Rica, I had about a week of eating arroz con pollo, and I'm like, no more, please. I wanted some American food. The first thing I did was go to TGI Fridays, get those boneless buffalo wings, dripping in the sauce, and a big burger and fries. And I was like, oh, this is America. MAGA, baby. I'd love to be back in America. And that's my hot take. That's the most American best food we've got.
Hot take with buffalo hot sauce. I like it, and I stand with you on this. I love buffalo sauce. My favorite, I can't have any more because always boneless buffalo wings are always breaded. But Chili's also has some mean boneless buffalo wings. I used to skip high school to go get them for lunch.
Chili's? People sleep on Chili's. It is a dope chain. People sleep on low-end American chain restaurants. They are absolute fire. Applebee's, Chili's.
Outback, yes. Did you say Outback?
I did not say Outback. I don't love to order a steak at like a chain like that. So
that's not what you get. You don't get steak. You go and you get cheese fries.
Oh, I'm triggered by Outback. In college, we used to get the blooming onions. And I'm telling you, that one appetizer is like 4,000 calories.
They are, yeah.
That should arguably be illegal as a public health hazard. Like,
I'm not saying these chains are healthy. I'm just saying you'll never take the Alabama out me. Like, you will find me at Outback. All right, guys, that's a wrap. We love you so much. Stay based. We'll see you next week.